In today's video, we're going to be taking this empty 110-gallon custom-made by me vivarium and turning it into a tropical paradise for one of the true gems of the rainforest, a pair of poison frogs, otherwise known as Oophaga histrionica fuego. They're currently the only ones in the country right now. I know you're here to learn how to build a wicked setup for your reptiles or amphibians. Fingers crossed they are for dart frogs though. Sorry, what was that? Anyways, in today's video, we're going to be building a beautiful background for these incredible frogs that I've already mentioned, and we are using a new method. This is the Corkbark panel method. It has been done before. I'm sure it'll be done again. More on the details behind that later in this video. Make sure you stick around and see how it turns out. Let's get to all the materials that you'll need to gather before starting a project like this. First, obviously, you're going to need a tank. Whether it's custom or not, it really doesn't matter. It's totally up to you. But if you are in the Toronto area and you're looking for a custom tank, my email's in the description. Hit me up. I also do backgrounds as well, but that's another story. In terms of the main building supplies, you'll need cork panels, a screwdriver, or a drill with a wire brush bit, filter foam pads, Manzanita, and some silicone. Don't worry, there's a few more things that you'll need, but I'll leave links to everything in the description down below, as well as a complete list so you make sure you have everything there. Now, whomever has made it this far into listening me list off items to build a tank, please consider leaving a like on the video and subscribing to my channel. It certainly helps me out, and I'm almost at 100k subs. Let's try and hit it before the new year. Come on, I believe. Now that you've collected all your items, the first step is making sure the glass is clean of any debris or oils that might have been left behind while moving the tank, or in my case, building the tank. To do this, I use an isopropyl alcohol spray and then follow it up with a light misting of a vinegar solution and then wipe it all down. Now that you have a clean work surface, it's time to get measuring the exact dimensions of the interior of your tank and planning out where you want to put your cork panels. While I'm doing that, I did want to say a huge thank you to a bunch of tanks on Instagram. Sharif has helped me through this entire build through the live streams and over Instagram. Incredible dude. Make sure you go toss him a follow. Now that we have the interior dimensions and figured out where we want all these cork panels, we can now mark out the lines on our cork before we start cutting. I did find, in terms of cutting, a metal ruler and a sharp razor blade work extremely great for cutting this 2-inch cork because the blade doesn't go all the way through. So when you snap it, it leaves a much more jagged and kind of broken edge, not a super clean look. And the best part of this all is after you've cut through half of the cork panel, listen to this snap. Ooh, nothing better than that. Before I lift this beast of a tank onto the floor to install the background, I wanted to mention that I did drill the back of this tank in order to install a bulkhead to drain the excess water in the drainage layer. Fear not, I did end up water testing it, and I did need a couple little tweaks before it was completely watertight, but nonetheless, I did get it there. Don't ask me how, but I got the tank from on the table to down here, and now it is time to install the cork panels. Just keep in mind, you have to make sure you account for that bulkhead when lying it down on its back, because if you don't, you will get a cracked tank or potentially worse and completely shatter it. To combat that, I used a couple extra pieces of cork chunks that I had lying around, and to the seasoned builders out there, that probably seemed fairly obvious, but I hope that I saved at least one person from just tossing this thing on its back and watching chaos ensue. Anyways, back to the background installation. It's really quite simple, and honestly, with proper technique, could probably be done standing up. For this next step though, you definitely need to use gloves. I mean, if you love dried silicone on your fingers, I guess don't. Applying the background panels is really as simple as you think it is. Really, you just apply a generous amount of silicone to the back of the cork panels. I would recommend no less than what I used here. If you want to use more, you certainly can. Once the silicone is applied, waltz on over to your tank and toss it onto the background. I'm not sure if it's too obvious in this video, but you kind of see me slide it into place, like place it maybe a ½ inch back and then slide it in all directions. And that's basically to spread out the silicone as much as I can, which makes for the most contact points between the silicone and the Corkbark panels. Once the Corkbark is suction cupped, I suppose, the technique I just described, to the glass, I then load it up with as many heavy things as I possibly can, and you'll see right now that those included a crate of water and a few jugs of spare water that we had lying around. Now, technically, you should let the silicone cure for 24 hours to be completely cured and secured, but it's pretty much dry after 30 minutes or so, So I'll leave it to you to make your own judgment whether you want to move it now after the, half an hour, 45 minutes have elapsed, or you want to let it cure for that whole 24 hours. But I ain't got time for that. We're building a tank today, so I flipped it after about 30. Now I just rinse and repeat that process until the background is entirely covered with the Corkbark, at which point it should look something like this. Wow. A flat corkback panel tank. How exciting. Not really, and that's why we're going to be taking it from what you see in front of you now to this. That's the goal. It makes it a lot more interesting, adds more visual appeal, and of course increases the space for your frogs / whatever other animal you're putting in this tank. So now let's dig into how I did it. The first thing that I did was to lay out all my Manzanita, and I grabbed one of the huge bromeliads that I had that I really wanted to incorporate into this tank, and that's what I kind of based the whole scape off of, honestly, was this one bromeliad. The goal of having all your available wood and a couple of the main pieces that you want to include in the scape, you'll be able to move things around and kind of see what works where and how you want to incorporate things differently. So after several hours of moving branches around, and I even actually took to temporarily attach them to the Corkbark background using super glue and cotton balls. To explain that really quickly, basically you just place the cotton balls where you want the attachment place of your Manzanita wood to your Corkbark, and then you soak it with some liquid super glue, which creates a highly exothermic reaction. Basically it means that it's really hot. Do not touch it for a minute or two. I speak from experience when I say that. And after those couple minutes have elapsed, you will basically have like concrete binding those two surfaces. Now, the nice thing is that it's not nearly as time consuming as letting silicone dry or having spray foam. So it's easy to just rip off the background. It's very non-committal, I suppose. Now, after those several hours of moving things around and gluing them in various different places, I ended with this. Now that I had the hardscape kind of established, I really wanted to add more kind of depth to the tank by adding square pieces that will eventually be blended into the background. So it allows the background to give the effect that it's like more like 4 inches deep rather than just the 2 that the standard Corkbark background is. Now with that all covered, we can finally get to the fun part. It's carving time. Like I mentioned at the beginning, you'll need a screwdriver and or a drill with a wire brush on the end. And with that being said, you should probably also fetch some safety glasses. And honestly, a mask wouldn't be a bad idea while you're drilling, because when you don't, dust happens. Once you're set up with the tools that you need, you basically have to let your mind go wild and try and create something that looks at least semi-natural. The way that I do this is basically kind of letting my mind go, and because I've had many years of building tanks and seeing these landscapes in the wild, I typically have a pretty decent idea of what I'm going for, but even I do get a whole bunch of advice from my friends like Troy Goldberg, and in this case a bunch of tanks. So I send pictures out, I ask friends what they think. At the end of it, I end up with a tank that I love, so it's definitely paid off for me. But just truly understand that you might not love the first tank that you build. Remember, you can always remove more. It's a lot harder to add stuff back. Now, as we near the end of our carving journey, you can see just what a mess it makes all across your floor. I had wood chips spreading like 6 or 8 feet out from the tank. Unfortunately, I did drop the ball a little bit and only have a little bit of footage of me and the method that I used to attach the other wood to the background, and that was foam. So I basically spray foamed, let it cure for just a few minutes, sprayed some water over top of it, which allows it to be more malleable. Then I just used my fingers to push it into the background. So I had left foam to carve after it cured. Then after it cured, I ended up carving it and covering it with silicone, and then actually using the cork dust that was generated from the carving step to cover the foam so you can no longer see it. And here's the results to that method. The cork is entirely encasing the branches, and honestly, you'd be none the wiser that it's actually foam back there, not just cork. And now we are finally at the point of figuring out the substrate. And for this tank, I'm going to be using the filter foam method, which includes using large pads of filter foam that will be used for the bulk of the entire substrate. As I mentioned in the very beginning, we will be using some other aqua soil as well. In this case, it's going to be Exoterra substratum. That will be used to just add some nutrients to the base. but the bulk of it will indeed be the filter foam, so let's stop blabbling and get to it. Because life is never simple and they don't make these foam pads to fit inside custom vivariums, we're gonna have to take some measurements here, so I did exactly that, and then it's time to start cutting out the filter foam in order to fit that bottom. The easiest method to cut this filter foam, in my opinion, was again with that metal ruler and just a very sharp X-Acto blade. That way you can cut fairly straight lines right through the filter foam, and I actually use a different tool to carve it later on, but we'll talk about that in a moment. The goal here was to just fill the entire bottom with foam, and then after that it was to gradually create some depth in the basically flat bottom by building up on each end. I decided to make the low point towards the left side of the tank, with the highest point of the substrate system being in the right side of the tank. After I got the foam to the height that I wanted it, I ended up filling in the little gaps around the foam with more of the leftover cork chunks that were removed during the carving process. This fills in any space for baby frogs, or I guess adult frogs, to kind of dig their way down and get under the foam. That would be devastating. Now this would look pretty rough if it stayed this blocky, because that would take a lot of substrate to cover those 2-inch ridges. One of my Twitch viewers, while I was streaming, ended up suggesting a hot wire to cut this foam, and man, what a game changer it was. I'll leave a link to it down in the description down below. They're like 30 bucks on Amazon. I would highly recommend this because it cuts through the foam like butter. And now to spare you of the like 45 minutes of me cutting foam and putting it back in the tank, we ended with a couple beautiful slopes that kind of channeled to one central point in the tank off to the left-hand side. And now it's going to be much easier to blend into the background. And now it's just time to mist everything down, making sure to remove all the dust and whatnot on the walls and actually flush it into the foam that we just put down. This is in preparation for the final stages of the tank build, which is going to be adding the substratum. We'll rip open this bag, get it into the enclosure, spread it all around, and with fairly little effort, the sponge basically just disappears under the substratum. Of course, later on I add some leaf litter as well, but that will be after planting the entire thing and letting the plants settle in for a few days. Speaking of plants, why don't we move on to that right now? One of my favorite parts of doing this build, that is planting. And if you guys are anything like me, I watch these kinds of videos to get inspiration about the hardscape and setting up tanks, but also one of my main focuses for every build that I watch is the plant selection. And let me tell you, I'm not going to let you guys down in this video. I will mention that I did actually stream the planting on Twitch. If you guys think that I should do something like that on YouTube, like a live planting stream for the next large vivarium that I'm building currently, make sure you let me know in the comment section down below. It will be the same size for a different locale of Histrionica, hint, hint, wink, wink, and it's going to be epic. So let me know in the comments down below if you would like to see a build video for that, as well as some streams while planting. Now here's just a few shots of me planting some of these plants into the background. You can see that I'm using some coated wire. Basically that just prevents it from rusting, or at least rusting as fast, but it really works to anchor your plants into the background. Then I moved on to coating this otherwise very dry log with some sphagnum moss in order to keep it moist, especially while the plants are establishing themselves. I really wanted this to be kind of a feature piece of this tank, so that's what I did my best to do. After coating this entire log with some sphagnum moss, I ended up wrapping it with some fishing wire. That way the frogs won't be able to knock it off the branch, and it will allow time for this branch to soak up as much moisture as it possibly can and allow moss and other various epiphytes to root into it and grow as they would in nature. And here is the finished product. This is everything I planted on day 1 and 2. I ended up adding some more as time goes on. This is just setting it up initially, and I'll give you guys like a 6-month update later on this month or early December. In the meantime, however, I wanted to bring you guys across the tank, and I actually left the plant labels inside to show you the names of each and every plant that I planted. Spoiler alert, some have done well, some not so much. But all in all, I'm very happy how this tank turned out, and I cannot wait to set up this new one that's coming in just a few weeks here. Now that you guys have seen all the plants that I introduced into this enclosure, I allowed it to mature or grow in for about 2 to 3 weeks before I ended up adding the frogs, but we're just gonna do a quick little time jump and add them right now. Okay, the frogs. Hi girly, did you end up laying? I feel like you might have. Frog 1. Frog 2. So excited. Now the first frog entering the beautiful vivarium is this gorgeous female Oophaga histrionica fuego. She did unfortunately require a little bit of assistance making her way into the vivarium, but it all worked out. And now the male Oophaga going into the enclosure. I did so not so gracefully, but he did end up bounding his way out of the cup. And then I caught up with him on the leaf litter. And there you have it, my friends. We have created a beautiful tropical ecosystem for our frogs. I love the way this build turned out, and I hope you do too. I know the frogs certainly have, but that's for another video. So stay tuned to the channel for an update on this vivarium. A lot has changed since the filming of this video, and I'm very happy with the results. So I want to thank everybody that made it to the very end. If you did make it to the very end, make sure in your comment you leave some word of fuego. That way I know everybody with that comment made it to the very end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. If there's anything you would like me to highlight more on the second build, please do so. I'm considering doing like a very in-depth, probably 35 to 45 minute long video, so let me know if you'd like that in the comments down below. If you did like the video, make sure you show that love and click that like button. Subscribe for more awesome content on these frogs and much more, and we'll catch you in the next one. Later.